In the middle. Okay.
Nothing changed.
I will start speaking Polish. So.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of our conference devoted to the relations between Russia and the West after the Crimea annexation. Last night we discussed about whether or not Russia has a big plan and a big strategy, and today we're going to discuss 3 areas or 3 regions where this confrontation is taking place. And this is Ukraine, the Middle East, and right now we'll be talking about the Balkans and the Visegrad countries. Our panelists this morning are Dessy Gavrilova, a social activist, creator and head of the Center, the Red House Center for Culture and Debate in Sofia. We also have Aleksandra Sekulić from Center for Culture Decontamination in Belgrade. She is a culture theorist and an activist. We have Michal Vašečka, sociologist and political scientist with Brno University in Slovakia, and Adam Balcer, an expert on the Black Sea region, but not only. Right now, he is from he represents WISE Europe. I'd like to start with a question to Dessy Gavrilova. And the question is, here in Poland, after 1989, we had quite a common consensus whereby we assumed that the path to the European Union was the path westward towards the West and an escape from Russia and from the geopolitical influence of Russia, even if the requirement of diplomacy or political correctness never allowed us to call it that explicitly. But at the same time, when Poland entered the EU, for many people, it was a feeling that the history finished for Poland and finished for good, and that we were on the right side. Finally, we had reached the shore. And that's the kind of thinking after 1989 that was, I think, typical for Poland, but not only for Poland. We thought that the whole Central Europe had the same outlook, that now finally we were back to our natural Western families. And I wanted to ask you whether the same vision of the European Union as the last good, true utopia, whether that was the sort of thinking that was typical for your country, for Bulgaria.
Yes, I think that in the beginning of the transition after 1989, this was very much the feeling, the general mood and spirit of the progressive forces at that time, and the feeling was that we need just 5 years and then Bulgaria will become Germany. So basically, the West started to be associated with prosperity, with democracy, and okay, now we are on the right path, we will be there. Just in brackets, I want to say that now looking at Ukraine, I notice this illusion as well, and it is very, very much apparent now in the case of the Balkans and of Bulgaria that this was an illusion, but now very much in places like Ukraine, there is the same feeling. After Maidan, there was this feeling that we need 5-10 years and Ukraine will become a normal European country, a democracy. This is not like this, and our experience in Bulgaria showed that it was not like this. We became members of the European Union in 2007, so we had 8 years of transition. And this transition, I think, actually had certain negative effects, which I find interesting to note here. Of course, there was a positive effect, which was allowing, at the end, once we became members, free travel within the European Union. But the side effect, the other side of the European integration actually was the fact that the very process of integration was very much driven by Brussels. There are these areas, policy areas that are regulated, there are benchmarks being put at some certain policy areas, which actually made different accents on the priorities of society, different than actually the people thought that the priorities should be. So basically, for example, ecology, as you know, is a very high priority in the accession. It's a regulated area. So everything was done, a lot of resources were being put in this area. And at the same time, if you look, for example, on education, which is the area where, there are polls throughout this accession process, people were identifying as a top area, nothing was done because there was no demand from Brussels in this accession process. So I think this is something that we have to have in mind when we're thinking about European integration, that there's some backside of it, the very process and the way it is structured. So one aspect of this is that actually politicians are driven away from people. So basically they start to respond more to demands from Brussels than to the demands of people. And I think what we are seeing now with the backlash of populism and the rise of populist parties all across this region is, in one way, this is of course not the only reason, but one of the reasons I think is this, that when politicians start to, for them starts to be more important what Brussels thinks than what their voters think, then this is an evil effect. Of course, there was, in 2007, there was this feeling, okay, finally we are on the right side of the shore, on the right shore of the river, as you said. But actually, 9 years after that, we think rather that we're in a swamp, rather than on the right side of the river, because actually we think that we see that nothing works, or very little of what we thought will work once we are members of the European Union is not working. For example, you know that judiciary reform is one of the areas which is a priority in the accession process. There are benchmarks being put, there is a pressure for reform. Okay, we are members since 2007, and even today, now in Bulgaria, there is this talk and movement and pressure and protest saying judiciary reform, the real judiciary reforms should finally start now. So basically what I'm saying is that even these areas, policy areas where pressure was being put in the accession process and is still in a way being put by Europe, they also do not work the way we were expecting them to work. The other aspect is that actually the whole accession process was happening in the years until 2007, which are the years of economic prosperity in Europe and in the world. So there was this feeling of, okay, we're getting there, everything will be good, there will be prosperity, etc. Then came the crisis, and of course this is another factor that actually made us see that things are more difficult and more complicated. There was a study recently, I think it was made on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of '89, which was about how people assess this transition, these 25 years of transition. And it was quite shocking. I don't know, it would be interesting what would be the answers here in Poland, but basically people were, in every area, people were saying that things got worse, apart from two areas, which were the freedom of the press and the freedom of travel. So people were really thankful that they have freedom of travel. Now looking at the refugee crisis, we wonder for how long. So this is also, we don't know. But so, okay, to finish, I just want to say that even if we thought that we are there, we are on the right shore, now we are very much aware that we are not.
To ja bym dopytał,
Let me just ask you another question. Here in Poland, many people, I'm sure, would answer that what is good is the fact that we're no longer the part of the Eastern Bloc. We were, until recently, quite sure that there's no threat in the East, that we were part of the Western structures and that we were there for good. Now, that transition from East to West, is that an element of the collective imagination in Bulgaria as well, or is that something that is absent?
I think that in general, the public opinion, I mean, we're happy that we are part of the West. We are members of NATO, we are members of the European Union. Of course, there are voices in society and there are groups and there are parties that would desire that we become members of the Eurasian Union. And we are back to Russian sphere of influence, but there I wouldn't say that these are very important voices and factors in Bulgarian political life at the moment.
Dziękuję.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask about a country that is closer to us geographically, that is Slovakia, and perhaps some more current affairs. We remember in the Polish press, we had a lot of coverage about the winding road that Slovakia took to get to the European Union. Machar's term of office was something that got a lot of coverage in Poland. But when Machar was removed, then we accepted that Slovakia was on the track that was considered normal or correct by us. And that also Slovakia was on the right track to get to the Western civilization. And just a few days ago, we had the elections in Slovakia, where Euro-skeptical parties were very successful. Moderately skeptical right-wing party, even fascist party was quite successful. So I wanted to ask you whether that turning point or the turning towards the right could be the result of the fact that the Slovakian society is perhaps a bit disgruntled with Europe, and that the European Union is a big problem for the Slovakian society, or perhaps it's just a replacement cause of all evil. Thank you very much for this question and for the invitation. I'm not going to pretend that I can speak Polish, because this will be very tiring for me and for you. Although I do pretend sometimes, and I have done for a number of years. I will prefer to speak English later on. But let me just say the first thing, that the beginning, the introduction, was a bit problematic, just as if I heard a joke from the Yerevan radio. He said that I represent the Masaryk University in Slovakia, but it's not in Slovakia, it's in the Czech Republic. I live in Slovakia. Brno is very close to 128. I assume a lot of people commute from Warsaw to Poznań, or vice versa, so that's no surprise. And I deal with sociology rather, but that's fine. It's okay. I know the concept of Radio Yerevan jokes. So generally speaking, yes, it's true, but when it comes to details, it's completely different. But going back to the discussion, let me say that I started it at 9 o'clock with my colleague Pomerantsev, so it seems to me that I'm not at the beginning, but in the middle of the road. But I will do something which is perhaps not fair to a lot of you. I will speak English now.
Switching into English, and so the question is about Slovakia, but I have to say right at the beginning, and sitting in Poland, this is actually, you know, almost not it's all meaningful to say that the whole Central Europe is backsliding from liberal democracy. Slovakia, for last few years, was, there were many question marks asked about character of regime of Prime Minister Fico, who in many ways was able to paralyze the rule of law in the country. The party which he's ruling was able, since he was ruling alone for last 4 years, penetrate into all possible structures of society, and overwhelmingly he's dominating. His people are dominating even in constitutional court. This is something what you know from Poland recently as well. But somehow miraculously, I must say, he was not endangering liberal democratic regime itself. He didn't have to. You can say he didn't have to, or you can bring a pretty brutal statement that he's unlike Mr. Kaczynski or Mr. Orban. He's rather empty utilitarian technician of power, who simply is not using any ideology, and that's why he doesn't have to do it. So now, less than a week after elections, some of us in Slovakia, we are realizing that liberal democratic regime might be endangered actually from the other side, where nobody really expected it. It can be endangered, and I'm not referring to fascists who went into the parliament, and make no mistake. Those are real fascists. You can compare them with only Jobbik and probably with Greek fascists in Europe. All others simply don't match. These are people who are even using, even in official documents, slogans and rhetoric of a Slovak fascist state from 1939, 1945. So make no mistake. We are not talking about radicals, nationalists, or these people. But in fact, fascists are just going to paralyze the system for months to come. The real danger are anti-European political parties who are claiming that they are liberal, that they are right-wing oriented, or they are trying to focus on economic issues. Immediately after elections, some of leaders were mentioning that now the reformist government should be created and we should continue with the reforms which made Slovakia tiger, Central European tiger, as Slovaks were proud of some 10 years ago. So obviously they didn't understand what's happening, and it's obvious that they actually don't understand the very nature of liberal democratic regime. Person who is actually trying to create the coalition at the moment, who believes that he might be a future prime minister, is genuinely anti-European. Genuinely anti-European. This is a person who actually brought Iveta Radičova's government down. He was the most important in that affair, and years to come he was not able even to realize that something bad happened. And just for those of you who might not remember it, the whole voting in Slovak parliament, where the previous government of Iveta Radičova, which was reformist and, if you want, right-wing oriented, but liberal right-wing oriented, generally speaking, was about Greek crisis and help of Slovakia within Eurozone. Yeah. So, and of course, there was argumentation that poor Slovakia cannot really help Greeks because Greek pensioners have 3 times more than Slovak pensioners, etc., etc. But and now returning to your question, what actually happened? Of course, I don't want to repeat everything in Poland, because we are sharing the same experience in many aspects. The societies are very anomic, and we have very similar historical roots of our civic and political culture in many ways. Certain anti-liberal traditions, certain anti-intellectual traditions, lack of trust, anomic society. So I don't want to go into details in this respect, because that's common. But what happened in Slovakia? Unlike in Poland, Slovak economic sphere and political sphere was dominated by oligarchy, which I see rather in countries such as Ukraine and Russia than in Central Europe. Even Mr. Fico, and there is a big question mark whether even Prime Minister who was ruling alone, the government was actually ruling it. You know, there are many questions, and I don't want to go into details, and we can even name all those doubts. Secondly, serious issues that all voters expected that will be tackled for years, and actually after tough economic transformation, everybody expected that something might eventually happen with health services and education. Nothing really happened. Education in Slovakia is falling like a rock. The quality of it is falling like a rock. Health services are collapsing. I know you can say the same about Bulgaria and about Poland, but the problem is when this is happening in a country which is actually, speaking statistically, growing up systematically and without any interruptions, which statistically is actually second or third the most successful transformation country from Central Europe, and people see that actually those important issues are not improving at all. You know, I'm also operating in the Czech Republic as a academician, so yeah, I'm also good product of it in a way. Another issue, and again, the level of it, you know the same from Bulgaria, from other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, but the paralyzed institutions of the state, of the Rechtsstaat, as Germans say, went so far that people became absolutely cynical. So, you know, absolutely cynical people would vote for anybody if there is a good roots of it. And I will come to the roots of why some people voted for fascists. Institutions are simply paralyzed. Consequently, cynical people believe in all types of conspiracy theories. Yesterday we tackled it. I would say, and still, I'm watching what is happening in Poland or the Czech Republic. I would say that Slovakia, together with Hungary, is actually closer to what we see in Ukraine or Russia. You know, this overwhelming belief that you know, conspiracies are behind everything. In case of Slovakia, one special flavor which was important in success of non-standard political parties was Roma community and feeling of many people in the country that nobody was doing for 25 years and practically anything for improving attitudes of Roma and non-Roma. And rightly so. I was working on these issues for years as well, and I must say that you know, it's a failure, and people started to believe non-standard political parties that they can achieve something. And now, lastly, roots of it, why fascists made it into parliament. Don't forget that civil society in Slovakia for the last 25 years was fighting its everyday battle with people who were actually trying to rehabilitate Slovak fascist state. And even during Mečiar times, civil society was successful in that. You know, there are numerous attempts to bring textbooks into schools which had very problematic content. And even during Mečiar times in 90s, Slovak civil society was always able to somehow defeat these tendencies. But this ability is systematically, you know, basically we are losing ground. There is a new generation who, you know, simply they don't have any memories even of revolution of 1989. So suddenly they are fascinated by the stories repeated by people who are 80, 90 years old and usually coming to Slovakia back from Toronto or from Australia and basically lecturing about the past of Slovakia. And suddenly this rehabilitation is very slowly and silently taking place. Of course, it's not dominant, and it will be never dominant. I'm positive, but it's poisoning the wells systematically. And we feel that those of us who are actually saying that Slovaks were not just victims, because this is a sophisticated way, not saying that Tiso was great, just saying we were just victims. We were forced by Germans to do what we did. We didn't attack Poland on September the 1st. We were just forced to do it. We were victims in it. I mean, of course, the Jews disappeared from the country, but we were victims. Just for information, Slovakia adopted even more strict anti-Jewish laws than the Third Reich those times. And I can continue, but this is not something what is taken for granted by people. On contrary, so relativization of all these liberal democratic values and relativization of everything what actually civil society achieved, especially in the battle with Mečiar regime, led to the situation that the whole system, political system, actually started to collapse. So now I'm much more afraid, not of fascists in the parliament, but of the total collapse of the standard political parties and various non-standard movements who actually don't even value basic principles on which we started the transformation in November 1989.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. I would like to now ask Aleksandra Sekulić about the situation in Serbia. For us in Poland, Serbia is a country that is depicted through stereotypes as a country and a society, and that it's strongly pro-Russian and also somewhat Euro-skeptical. So this is the stereotype that still functions. So I'd like to ask whether in your country, for the left wing or for progressive parties, for the anti-right wing or anti-nationalist, the situation is similar than in Poland, that Europe and the West are a model of values that we strive for, but also a vehicle that would enable us to also to have these values take root in peripheral areas. In Poland, there is a consensus for acceptance for the European Union in geopolitical terms, but in terms of civil rights, values, the rights of minorities, for us, Europe was a point of reference for the left wing or the anti-right wing movement. So let me ask whether these divisions, or maybe let me retract, whether for the progressive forces in Europe, in Serbia, Europe is a horizon for which they're striving, like the Polish left wing, or is it also a negative point of reference for other forces, or is your approach somewhat different?
Interesting question. Now, when I heard the first two inputs, I was wondering how is it possible that my country with recent history is so much different than your experiences came up exactly to the same place. So it's for me a very inspiring puzzle to solve now. But let's start with, well, all the terms are here very relative and problematic. And for one, I will start with the horizon as a concept. Well, there was a conference 3 years ago, former West in Berlin. And I remember the concluding meeting of, I don't know, 12 philosophers actually collapsed. Boris Budin, who was moderating this discussion, he admitted, okay, this conversation collapsed, but fortunately we heard about a very, very strong lecture about welcoming immigrants. That was 3 years ago. Not really a hot subject at the time. So they're citizens of future. Maybe they will rethink our Europe and our horizons because we are not capable. Former West was actually a concept of constant reconstituting the West through the other, which is usually East. And if that is so, and if we are the other to reconstitute the Westness of the West, Well, it's very gloomy then. From Serbia, we can hardly define Europe to put it as a horizon. I come from a generation that was demonstrating against Milosevic with this huge transparent Belgrade is the world. Warning Milosevic that there is Europe that is watching and he can't do what he thinks because some basic values in Europe after the Second World War, human rights, are established and you just can't do it. There were several discouragements in recent history of this European horizon, at least for my generation. I can reconstruct from the previous horizons of Europe. I still remember socialist Yugoslavia, so I can also relate to that, well, to a certain extent. But for example, Euro integrations were usually used in Serbia like Euro-Atlantic integration. That's a problematic again in Serbia because every day when you pass by a tram, pass by ruins from NATO bombing, you can't really expect that citizen to really identify with NATO and Euro-Atlantic integration. So to start with, we have this negative connotation of NATO, which will take time to absorb, and that's where now right wing is the most prominent opposition voice to a very confusing, ideologically empty, and very flexible postmodern government that we have. Almost schizophrenic, and it's like good cop, bad cop in every foreign policy issue. So there are several layers of confusing political and social context, but let me now connect with those experiences. We all have coming very strong, let's say, right-wing fascist opposition that mobilizes youth because they seem to be alternative and different than this boring PC, especially in Serbia. This dominant narrative of let's reform ourselves to join European Union as a horizon of better was always mixed with something that young people really can't sustain, that guilt that you take from your parents for the 90s, that you have to face responsibility, some horrific crimes that are always through right narrative problematized and relativized. So in all this confusion, right wing says, look at this ruin. Are we going to go into NATO because your parent is now dying because of cancer, because of the bombing of Pančevo chemical industry? Now the rate of cancer is 80% higher. So we are living the consequences of the 90s and that bombing also. So it's very, very problematic to connect this sparkling new horizon with the very evident consequences of the 90s. The next very evident thing is completely confusing idea of what European is. For example, if we are to reconstitute Europe from this other, and that let us be the other, we have a problem of very, let's say, operational and dominant rehabilitation of the losers of the Second World War in Serbia, in Croatia. And we're like competing. Croatians have a minister who is inclined to Ustashi movement. We do a legal rehabilitation of collaborators of Nazi regimes in Serbia, which, if I might remind you, we celebrated 70 years of liberation from Nazis last year. We had the most confusing military parade ever, where our current government was not able to say, okay, this is October, where Yugoslav partisans and Red Army liberated Belgrade from Nazis. They connected somehow this celebration with First World War celebration. You had all the military uniforms there. Our president, who built his career on rehabilitation of Chetniks, is now supposed to stand next to Yugoslav partisan, a very old hero, and talk about this. He couldn't say Yugoslav party, but who did? Vladimir Putin. He said Yugoslav partisans and Red Army liberated. So anti-fascism, which should be one of the values that European Union is requesting, promoting, and understands as one of the basic values from the Second World War and its own establishment, is now invested in Putin, actually, because he doesn't have a problem with that. Our Chetnik president.
He's the greatest anti-fascist.
Yes, but exactly like Milosevic, for example, took the position of anti-globalist. So he ruined that for us in the 90s. We couldn't, he literally spent this whole position by standing up to the world and so on, liberal world. Now we have that position of anti-globalist and kind of forging this leftist inside the government, also present and as a one marginal party inside this governing coalition. We have pro-European prime minister who is the best friend of Angela Merkel, as you can see in our news. You have our president who is constantly waving with this Russia possibility, option. So everything is possible and everything is used occasionally. We are constantly living pre-election campaign because you never know when elections might happen. Now they are happening, but that's one man to decide. So, you know. History is being played with. Nothing is taken seriously. We are on the exact same point of cynical misuse of history, but also enemy. When you said enemy, that's the most useful word for my colleague Borka Pavićić. She was supposed to be here, but I had to replace her. She uses enemy to describe the atmosphere and this general mood. That's very dangerous because after that you usually have a wave, euphoric wave of somebody who has a very articulated message. Now right wing is coming to mobilize around this articulated message against that. And that's a challenge for us. I come from a generation that was several times trying to explain what the left is, because it's also spent. I mean, Milosevic came from Socialist Party, but reconstituting left for us might be a process like reconstituting Europe from and West from us. So let's see what left is left for us. For example, in 2008, Democratic Party won the elections with this Europe. Choose Europe over right wing. At the time in 2000s, when I speak about progressive youth, we can say that there was an attempt to connect civil rights movement and anti-war movement from the 90s with generations that are coming in 2000s. And in 2008, Kosovo proclaimed independence. We saw demonstrations in Belgrade, very aggressive, with result of burning the American embassy. Those were children in the streets. Those were children from high school and some younger, mobilized through football supporters and, you know, the usual. And I could understand why. I was on some forum that they usually come to play and those games, computer games and so on. So I could see how they react to this. And they came from this unstable education system where you might have Darwin one day and the other not, and then again you will have Darwin and evolution, depends on political party. So everything else is also moving. Rehabilitation of and relativization of anti-fascism and Second World War was not the dominant, but it was also, let's say, it was confusing them. They were trying, I saw on the peer-to-peer networks, their profiles. They would have, for my generation, some unthinkable things related together, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle and make this mosaic of documentary shows and songs of Yugoslavia or whatever, something that we could never relate in one person. So I'm sorry for taking so long, it's a very complicated country. So they were, they heard an articulated and very mobilizing voice say no to this humiliating, undignified, constantly being punished for something you did wrong, as if we are constantly in school and being the worst people. That's not how you imagine the collective you belong to. So, of course, if we don't let right wing take it, our left doesn't have a political articulation in a party. We do have something that I was part of from the 90s and 2000s. And in the beginning, it was just a magazine with some other intellectuals around, some young curators. Contemporary art scene was also a place of articulating this left, which was impossible anywhere else. And I think it is now growing, especially since world economic crisis, when this left was evident and seen everywhere as a reaction to the collapsing values that were so intact, like liberal capitalism and democracy, and they're divorced. Let's remember Zizek and his speeches in Occupy Wall Street. So there is a zeitgeist helping to it, but there is also memory of Yugoslavia. So it's a very strong point. I mean, we had a different experience of socialism, which we can draw to and turn to. And now more and more I see it, and it's very encouraging, that we have a front called Left Summit of Serbia. Of course, they don't want this horizon to be European Union that doesn't know what it is. It's completely disoriented, and the only value that is now obvious is some economic interest. If you despise Syriza and very harshly punish that option and tolerate Orban and Croatia and Serbia, you are sending a very strong message. On the other hand, if you want to proclaim anti-fascism as something that is a value from decades from the 20th century, one of our biggest values that is still in Serbia, I must say that is still dominant. I mean, many people remember Yugoslavia, many people remember Second World War results and consequences. You won't have such a strong movement, even now during the rehabilitation of Milan, the former minister, Nazi collaborator. You don't see support in Serbia, although the process is going on, and its end result will probably restitution of which is actually the end result of all really unthought through fascist rehabilitation. I could talk for hours, but we'll continue. I'm sorry.
Bardzo dziękuję. To oczywiście jest bardzo skomplikowane.
Very much. It truly is very complicated. I would like to ask now Adam Balcer. His text on the activities of Russia in the Balkans was really the inspiration for this panel. But before I ask about Russia, allow me to ask about Europe in the Balkans. Our imagination in North and Central Europe is sort of focused by Milan Kundera and his story of Central Europe that was part of West captivated by the East and wants to go back to its original place. So is this type of thinking something that is also present in the Balkans, and that or is it really viewed completely differently? And the West Andes are not the benchmarks. Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you. And I thank you that my text was an inspiration for this panel. With respect to those concepts, grand concepts, and those quantifiers, East, West, Asia, Europe, terms that we like to use or have actually abuse because even they obscure the understanding of what's happening in Europe instead of aiding in this understanding. And there are sweeping statements when we speak about this opposition or the negative component. When we speak about Asia, this is raised in the context of the migrant crisis, but also in the context of these authoritarian concerning tendencies of Central Europe. Then oftentimes we hear that Central Europe has become the East. And we tend to view this area from Tallinn to Greece as one cohesive area. There are some elements that are in common, but we need to be careful because this is an area that is strongly diversified. And this is also true of the Balkans. If we look at the Balkans from the cultural identity perspective, a civilizational perspective, the Balkans, without a doubt, have their specificity. This is a region where states where most of the inhabitants are Islam believers. And Prime Minister Orban can say that Islam has never been part of Europe, but this, of course, is in opposition to the statement of Madam Merkel and to Deutschland that Islam is part of Germany. Then we have 3 countries where Muslims are a large share of the inhabitants: Bosnia, Kosovo, and Albania, and 3 countries with considerable share of such residents: Montenegro, Bulgaria, let's say up to 15%, and 30-some to 40% in Macedonia. So in fact, this is proportionally a region where we have the biggest, let's say, grouping of Muslims in Europe. So this is quite specific because in this context, we have to have also another actor. We'll be speaking about Russia, but an actor that one needs to remember in this context is Turkey, which this part of the world is playing a role from the Muslim perspective, a protector, but also in terms of what's happening within Turkey is reflected in these societies, Muslim societies. In other words, milieux that support the Turkish government and criticize the Turkish government. So in other words, we can speak the post-Ottoman tradition, and Turkey is referring to that tradition. And in the case of the Balkans, this is particularly material because, and we have to be mindful of this, that the capital of the empire was Istanbul. And Istanbul was and is in Europe. And the core of the Ottoman Empire, and if you look at Justinian Constante and the biggest Vassars, we will see that it was actually from the Balkans. So speaking about this area as a periphery is really something that ought to be questioned, because we're really speaking about very important cities in the history of the world, Byzantium and the Ottoman Empire. So when we speak about Muslims in the Balkans, we have to enter or address an issue that is very much present in the context of Turkey and Turkey's integration, to a lesser extent in the Balkans, but the question whether Islam is part of Europe. And what is Europe? Is there space? Is there room? Because sometimes, should we listen to some of the politicians, it will turn out that they have a problem, intellectuals or even ordinary people in Central Europe. And there's a digression. In Poland, we have a tendency that we're oversensitive or hypersensitive to what is said about us in the West. But we have no scruples to use the sweeping statements about the Balkan barrels of gunpowder. And this is how we can, let's say, put some ointment on our own wounds. And so this Byzantium, the Orthodox tradition of Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania, some say, well, this is because of the cultural differences. This is even more pronounced when we refer to Muslims. So this is not some distant history, but the question, how? and what will be the attitude toward Europe of this region, of the groups of people and nations residing in this part of the world, when the process of European integration loses its attractivity because it slows down, or in some cases is really just a virtual process. And at the same time, there are serious problems in, let's say, relations between the European Union and Russia, or the European Union and Turkey. How will those two actors, Russia and Turkey, try to play their hand, play the trump cards vis-à-vis this region, recognizing that this is the soft underbelly of Europe, place which is more like an enclave, that Western Balkans, and the European Union coined this term, and that they're truly strongly integrated. If we were to look, and we do travel to Germany, Austria, and we travel to Switzerland and Sweden, there are plenty of people who originally come from the Balkans, to say nothing about trade, foreign investment, students. So we have this integration, but we also hold these countries as our antechamber, our waiting room. So the joke is whether Serbia will become a member of the European Union after Turkey is a member. And everybody in the Balkans is laughing at this, because we get the feeling that the process of integration, owing to certain political calculations in Western Europe, can be artificially dragged out. So I do believe that this is not groundless arguments, and something that is very irritating to me is the situation of Romania, which has really scored a very strong success in fighting corruption, and nobody a few years ago could anticipate that the success would be so strong. But through various recommendations of the European Commission, and I'm not speaking here about Monty Python, that is Macedonia, which not 3 times, but many, many times, had to have the opinion of the European Union opinion, and five times, actually, I know it's 5 times, but it was 5 times or even more to even begin the accession talks. So, and Romania, which is not accepted into the Schengen area, which also has impacted the decision in September or in autumn, where the Romanian states were vetoing this, not because we have problems with refugees, but don't expect from us to demonstrate solidarity and meet some criteria if you do not apply the same principles vis-à-vis us. So this is the first issue, that there is a region that, in terms of contemporary level of NATO integration and EU integrated, is very diversified, because we have members, candidates, countries in the process of negotiation, potential candidates, member countries, and Serbia, and elite who don't even want to be in NATO, and Greece, which is everywhere, Schengen, Euro, and European Union, NATO, and is a Balkan country. So without that, come back to Europe, that you called the Northern Central Europe. I understand by that you mean the Visegrad group, and that diversified in this sense. And the second specific trait is the biggest community are Orthodox believers, diversified, of course, as a group, and then Muslims. So this is a unique place in this term in Europe, and there will always be this issue of a reference to cultural identity, which is very complex. A moment ago, Aleksandra spoke about a minister in the Croat government. This is the Minister of Culture. And let me recall that this Minister of Culture is called Zlatko Hasanbegovic. It's not a Roman Catholic name. And this shows that he's also from a noble family. He's a Muslim and a Croat nationalist. And this is a question of the history of Croat nationalism, which from the very beginning, from Sutowski's time, was strongly convinced that Muslims in Bosnia are the flower of the Croat nation. That's what Sutowski said, the very best of the best, the cream. And then the fascist country linked with the German Nezavisna Država Hrvatska, independent. Croat state, and their leader, Ante Pavelic, and I'm certain he's in hell, even though he was a practicing Roman Catholic, was a person who was raised in a village, mainly with Muslims. He went to Mecca, where he, and that is a Muslim school, where he learned to read and write. He was an Islamophile. Today it's popular to be Islamophobe, but he was an Islamophile and had the same views as Starchevich. And he was proud that we, the Croats, had ruled in Istanbul, the most powerful Ottoman country in the world. And then, this created this country, which was a satellite of Germany and Italy, he transformed one of the main pavilions into a mosque. So it doesn't fit into this narration that we have, that in Central Europe, very frequently, as if we were to look at Poland, Jan III Sobieski, the vanguard of the grant of Christianity, saved Christianity for Europe. So I could count examples also from Central Europe or from the Baltic states, which are simply not a part of this simple template that we can divide Islam versus Christianity. Maybe I'll end with this. It's a complicated, this matter itself is very complex. And it makes the debate also quite challenging. So I will now like to ask for slightly briefer responses to a more difficult question, I believe. In other words, a forecast for the future. I would like to ask Dessy Gavrilova whether in the developments of the last few months, particularly connected with the influx of refugees into the south of Europe, and at the same time, a right-wing response to this process. Are we in danger of bringing up new divisions or reinstating the divisions between East and West in Europe, which seemed to have been overcome through European integration? Or at least many hoped that this was the case. Or can we simply awaken in a Europe that is once again divided into East and West?
I want to give you a little bit of insight about the perception of this whole issue and the public debate in Bulgaria, as much as there is about the refugee crisis, because I think that there is one major difference between the West. In West, what I see is that societies are quite divided. On one hand, there is this demand that there is borders are closed, refugees are just regularly let to enter Europe, and this influx is stopped, blocked. On the other hand, you have a big wave, you had it last autumn, of sympathy and of NGO groups opening their stations to welcome, to help, to feed, to... So there is this civil society kind of energy which we saw last autumn in countries like Austria or Germany. In Bulgaria, the situation is quite paradoxical because on the one hand, we don't have such an influx of refugees. Actually, I have the figures here that in the last 25 years, there were 11,000 people who received the status of a refugee. It's true that about 10,000 of them are in the last 3 years. So for us, it's quite a shock. It's quite a big number. It is in the context of the last 25 years, but compared to countries like Austria or Germany, it's just nothing. And in the other hand, the public discourse on the refugees is absolutely united, and it's very much, don't let them in, stop them, they're going to change our culture, going to take us over. So it's very, very much xenophobic. And what is very much striking is that even the Orthodox Church, the Holy Synod, for example, issued a statement saying that we do help as much as we can with the refugees, but the government should not let further refugees to enter the country. This is an official statement of the Holy Synod. I think that one should exchange the church to have more empathy to the weak, but that was it. The interesting thing is also that the voices that have been dominating the public discourse in the recent decades even, and which are rather liberal voices, have at once turned very much xenophobic. And they're giving a lot of media space and air on television and radio programs. And you know, statements like this, I just took one and wrote it down here in order to give you sense the flavor of what is discourse there. They have become a rule. So, for example, one of the major figures, a political analyst who is regularly commenting on developments in the country, said on television that we have to, he said, quote, "We have to stop to be attractive to the migrants. They have to hear that in the countries where they want to go, they're going to be beaten and there will be no food for them. And they shouldn't hear that there they will get free food and they will get naked women on the streets." So basically, this is the discourse at the moment. So one can say that our society is getting wild at once. One can imagine this, that we have become cruel. There are some reasons for that, I think, though, for the fears of people which have been in this situation very much exploited, and actually these voices thrive on these fears of the people and exploit them. But there are several reasons that I see why society is turned like this. One of them, of course, is poverty. All this time in the accession process and in the last 25 years in general, we were the poor, well, we are the poorest country in the European Union, Bulgaria is. So we always think that we are the ones to be helped. Well, how now we are supposed to help these other peoples when we are so poor ourselves? Then there is another issue, I think, which is important, and which is that we have this minority, which are the Roma people, which is a traditional minority in the country, but which we have failed to integrate so many years. I mean, there are all these problems with crime, with they're not going to school. There is a lot of unemployment amongst this group. So the people are thinking, if we're incapable to integrate these people, which have been here for ages, how will we integrate some Syrians or Iraqi or the Afghani people that we don't speak their language even, and they don't speak ours. The other factor, I think, is this demographic fear, because Bulgaria is the most rapidly shrinking in size. I mean, we have a negative growth, the biggest negative growth in Europe. And there is another factor that a lot of the young people go to study abroad or to work abroad and they never return. So basically there is this, the population is getting older, and people are thinking, so who will be the young people then? There will be these strangers, Muslims, who will take us over, they'll take over our culture, etc. And of course, I think there is another factor that we don't have this, Bulgaria was never an empire itself. We don't have this experience. We were into. Yes.
The Great was an empire.
Okay, we don't remember. It was too long ago. So there is this, in a way, the people are thinking, okay, we have these poor relatives in the villages, that this is with whom we have to have solidarity and help them, and we don't have just the capacities to have this empathy for these distant people. So the other thing is that the state itself and our institutions are very much incapable of really providing everything which is needed for a successful integration of these people. Just one example, there are at least 1,000 children who are in school age amongst these refugees which were given a status in Bulgaria. Guess how many go to school, to Bulgarian schools? 8. When I read this was shocking. 8 children. So basically, there's a lot of bureaucratic barriers to them entering the school. They're demanded to provide endless numbers of papers, etc., which they don't. And probably also they actually hope to move further And this is why they're probably also themselves not much interested in going to schools. But this is a failure of the integration process, a very showing one. On the other hand, and this is probably going to be my last point because you wanted us to be short, is the attitude of the government, which is in a way different from the attitude of society, because our government, the one we have, on the one hand, it's very populistic, but it's very much, you know, we want to be the good pupil in the European Union. Our prime minister is like, for him, Frau Merkel is like the headmistress, and he has to do whatever Frau Merkel says, and he shouldn't be.
This is precisely what Donald Tusk was accused of in Poland as well.
No, but it is really very much like this. So we are fulfilling everything that we have signed up for in terms of the numbers of refugees that we'll be taking, etc. On the other hand, we are sending the army on the border now with Greece, because we are expecting that after the closure of the Macedonian-Greece border, there might be the path can be deviated through Bulgaria. So basically, the government's attitude is like, between us, we like Orban's policy, but we'll say this loudly only after Merkel. When she says this, okay, we'll say this. Yeah.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I'd ask Michał Vašečka now. Slovakia is perceived here in Poland as a largely infiltrated country in terms of the oligarchic structures, and it's a country that has a society which sympathizes with Russia a lot. So my question is, well, you said that it's not just a problem of fascists, but a problem of Euro-skeptical movement, and that a lot of the parties fall within that movement. So if we have Euroscepticism, now there's a question whether it's possible to turn towards the other direction, whether Slovakia can perhaps turn right or left, but towards the east. Would that be an element of the geopolitical puzzle of a new kind?
In fact, Slovakia was playing on both sides for years, and you were watching it from Poland. And Slovaks were good in it, you know, I mean, playing on, you know, that was the only country in Central and Eastern Europe which had equally good relations in Washington, Brussels, Moscow, Zagreb and Belgrade. Nobody made it, you know, I mean, to have equally good relations in Zagreb and Belgrade, you know, that shows something about your abilities, you know, to negotiate and to be nice. Okay, seriously. Slovakia will continue to play on both sides, but Euroscepticism is deeply rooted in a country which otherwise, when you check sociological surveys, you can see that 80% of people are actually declaring positive views of European Union. You know, so it doesn't make sense, but in fact, if you go deeply, it does. What does it mean that Slovakia is anti-European or might be viewed as anti-European? You know, what does it mean to be anti-European? You know, you are in train, you are in favor of train, or you are against the train. You know, that doesn't make sense. You are, you know, you are West if you have Western values. Because, I mean, I don't want to attack anybody, but Warsaw is not really West. I mean, it's you know, Bulgaria, you know, which is, you know, neighboring Ottoman Empire, former Ottoman Empire, you know, Turkey. That's not West. It can be West only thanks its values. And if you are losing values, you are not West. And in this respect, Slovakia is becoming less Western systematically. And in this respect, you know, well-known person in Poland, Mr. Czarnogórski, religious Roman Catholic who became the greatest fan of Mr. Putin and Russia. That's showing, you know, this schizophrenia, which is going deeply from the history. Christianity came from the West, but at the same time with Cyril and Methodius from the East. If you look at Slovak passports, of course, you know, there is a double cross, you know, which is in fact some Stephen cross from Hungary, but at the same time it's somehow connected to traditions of Cyril and Methodius coming from Balkans. So we are using Latin, but in a Slovak passport you would find also Cyrillic, you know, as kind of a remember all times that nobody actually remembers. But you know, we are still in Slovak mythology. remembering that those were the times of Great Moravian Empire, which were great, and then these bad Hungarians smashed it down, and only thanks to Czechs we somehow recreated it. But Czechs were arrogant and too liberal, too Western. But and etc. So the story continues this way. So it's really deeply rooted patterns of thinking, and all Slovak children actually are learning in schools poetry from 19th century. I will say it in this old type of Slovak Czech language. Přikloň se tam k tomu dubisku, jenž vzdoruje s houbným až dosaváde časům. Turn to the oak, Russia, that resists, to these destructive times so far. And this, this was structuring the mind of young Slovaks, for a very long time. So don't be surprised that if you are measuring feelings about Russia and Russians and Russian policies in V4, Slovaks are the most pro-Russian. But at the same time, there is certain schizophrenia that I can expect that if the presence of Russia would be too strong, Slovaks would turn against. This is this bizarre schizophrenia which is present there, and of course what was extremely destructive in this respect was also the policies of Mr. Fico in last month and his discourse against migrants, because Slovakia, in the same way as Bulgaria and many others, and unlike Poland in the past, was very constructive and actually silent. Let's do everything what Angela wants. Let's be nice. This was the first time when Fico
a similar question about Serbia to Aleksandra Sekulić. The Serbian Prime Minister Nikolić said recently that the EU membership is no longer the great dream that it was in the past for the Balkan states. And here again, my question would be whether there is any possible alternative that Serbia could perhaps turn towards Serbian Orthodox nationalism with a blade that is turned towards the Muslim tradition, but on the other hand, European liberalism, and turned towards Russia. Is it a credible perspective that the political scientists are pointing out? Is there any potential in the Serbian society towards such a turn to the east?
Well, maybe this one, yeah. Then we go back to the question, what is the expectation of European membership. Well, Croatia entered the European Union, and there were jokes there like, we came to the end of the party when there's one guy drunk and lots of mess everywhere, and that's our European party. After party. When we get some hope from this European horizon, and let us remember, horizon in British English means a slightly different thing than in German because of Heideggerian use of horizon. There is this opening to broaden your perspective, or in German Heideggerian version, something that is the final limit. So there are limits that we expected from this horizon to limit nationalism, and there is something broadening which was supposed to be this progress and developing of humanism, actually. Well, if that is a perspective that could actually win, it should again make this soul search. What are the platform of like unique values and human rights that could be this offer that we can't resist, and which is different than which would prevail for this progressive, and I think majority anyway in Serbia now government is pro-European, and that's also 80% of mobilized voters are for. So if this nationalistic euphoria that comes after disappointment of this European horizon, we need this platform that will rethink the platform of human rights. I would go back to refugees, for example, because that's the way also to reconstitute your own horizon. In Serbia in 2013, there were demonstrations because of some asylum seekers from various countries, somewhere in the woods, were invited to this central point, and villagers organized demonstrations with tractors and blockades, like they bring diseases, they are stealing, and so on, all the stereotypes. And then one satirical TV show, which is probably the most influential educational show that we have now, or don't, because we don't know if it will appear next season, said, oh, of course, they steal, and they want your jobs or something, because we don't have anything in our own memory of that kind. There were several hundreds of thousands of refugees in Serbia after Croatian finishing Storm military operation in '95. Hundreds of thousands of people coming without anything, with plastic bags, and just leaving the burning houses they left. So if you cannot connect that image of your people coming from the war and those people coming from the war or poverty, which is the same, then what are we talking about? And I was amazed how now you don't hear those voices anymore. Really. I mean, there are some political parties trying to catch up with European, like fascists and so on, but actually there were enormous actions of solidarity, and okay, that's also problematic because this solidarity comes up, you don't burden your government in very organized actions, you have solidarity with citizens. But anyway, I think this xenophobia example, and it's overcoming by immediate memory, which is specific to Yugoslavia in the 90s and the war that we survived, shows that capacity for such nationalism and xenophobia is not as big as they would expect. And this dream of some kind of new interculture, I would say, the last general value of Europe we remember, community, not so forgotten for somebody coming from Yugoslavia. I grew up in Yugoslavia, didn't know I was Serbian. I was in Vojvodina. I didn't know my friends are Hungarian or Slovak or it's highly multicultural environment. And now European Union is implementing multiculturalism in Vojvodina. I grew up in something that was understood. I never knew it was multicultural. It was normality. And I think that is not so forgotten there. Then we have Sandžak, that's a Muslim province in Serbia. Also, the north of Vojvodina is now mobilized through nationalism, both from Hungarian and Serbian side. And that's also wrong, and I think short term. In Sandžak, I also know a lot, and we used to work a lot with people from Sandžak. Borka, my colleague, also noted because she has more experience there. Like so many civic organizations for preventing conflict. There are more those civil NGOs for preventing conflict and multiculturalism than educational infrastructure, health infrastructure. That's what is actually spending that idea. So over bureaucracy and this emptiness behind this bureaucracy of implementation of something, if you don't see it performed in Europe itself, you can't believe that. And that's the problem. I wouldn't really take much into consideration all those pre-election campaign statements, really. That's the game. I mean, it's cynical politicians, anomic voters, so I wouldn't analyze it from that perspective.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Adam Balcer and refer to what I was speaking about at the beginning, the text that was published about the aspirations of the Russian influence in the Balkans. Now, is it really the case that Russia can be an alternative for the Balkans, or is it just a place where Russia can try and play some of its interests, but without constituting any clear integration perspective or an alternative model other than Western Europe or the European Union? I think that for Russia, well, Russia, of course, is very well aware that the Balkans are a weak link in the European Union, and that in a way this is a test for us, because if we can't cope with several small countries and if we can't support them and integrate them, and we know that they are the island in the European Sea, then it means that all our global ambitions, all the rhetoric, G3 with US and China, that all of that is just an empty narrative. And Russia is also well aware that it has a strong hand in that region, and that most probably, if we look at the soft power, so the social dimension of it, then we can say that it has the strongest position in that region, in Europe. But on the other hand, for me, this is predominantly an area where we could just instrumentally use this close hand for what is called a proxy war. I'm not talking about an armed conflict, but just a geopolitical rivalry. Because at this point, what is of key importance for Russia outside the post-Soviet area, and I don't really like the term, I think it's obsolete after 20 or so years, and because of the geopolitical processes that took place in Eurasia, but it's still very, very active in the Middle East. And of course, we can expect, when we look at Russia's policy, we talk a lot about the eastern flank. Well, this could be understood, or should be understood, broadly from the Arctic Aleppo, that Russia is trying to create some problems to various degrees. It doesn't have an unlimited potential, but of course, also in Europe, it is trying to show that when the Russian aircraft breached the French airspace. There was a signal from Russia saying that they could potentially hit from a different spot. So if Russia considers that the situation in the Balkans is favorable, there is a lack of stability, or that there are some problems or some other conditions that would be conducive to perhaps give the European Union a bit of a kick, then it will not definitely hesitate. And Bosnia could be such a place where there is a Serbian republic, which is part of the federation, and where the political elite and the society in the Balkans is most pro-Russian. And we know that country is the Gordian knot and of Europe, and that regulating its status is a big challenge for the European Union. And when we look at polls, it's worth looking and perhaps scratching the surface a little bit and looking beyond that, because we have a similar situation in Poland. We hear that Polish people are very pro-European, but when they're asked about more detailed issues, it turns out that the pro-European attitude is very much declarative, and it is only limited to just squeezing Brussels, just squeezing the lemon of the European funds. So in Bosnia, we could hear from Bosnian Serbs, yes, we are pro-European, even though the society is very much divided. However, the majority would probably declare that if there was a referendum, would want to be members. But if they were asked whether or not this could be linked to the limitation of competences, and this is, of course, automatic, then the majority would say no. And if there was a dispute between, or a confrontation between Russia and the West, should we then opt for the West, even if this were to Russia, if this were to trigger painful consequences, then of course the majority would say that we should choose Russia. So of course different cards could be played, but we need to remember that this is a two-edged sword, and that this Russian potential will encounter some limitations in field. We need to remember that in the Western Balkans, we have this very big Muslim community that hates Russia, and that for demographic reasons, it's not true that they are really breeding very fast, the Muslims. They have negative growth of population, but however, long term, the population will be growing. So we have Serbs, we have Bosnians, and they are not very fond of Russia either. So their world is simple too. For them, it's the West against Russia. So these factors, all of them, mean that, well, Russia for sure will be trying to pressure the Balkans, but we need to prepare we need to be prepared to acknowledge that it's not just there, it will pressure also other points in Europe. Let's remember one thing as well. Of course, I am scared when I see polls in which Polish people say that 7,000 refugees will bring Muslim dominance in Poland, and among young people it was 80% of people who said that, and that was before the Paris attacks and before the New Year's Eve events in Germany. So now it would perhaps even have a greater support. Well, this proves that there are a lot of fears and a lot of irrational attitudes in Poland, and of course I'd rather see more sympathy and solidarity movement. But when we look at Western European countries, we need to also acknowledge that there are political groups such as the Swedish Democrats who, in some polls, enjoyed 25% support. Now it's dropping. But we have also Ms. Marine Le Pen, who in the polls for the presidential election has support that exceeds 25%. So it's not as if we can cut Europe into half and say East-West, and that the West is liberal and has no problem with nationalism, and that the East is what it is. Not very interesting. But this is linked to what I said earlier, that very often it's not so simple, that we can find nationalist traditions that are not necessarily anti-Muslim, although they could be. And there are also some threads, like in Croatia, that are also anti-Muslim or pro-Muslim.
Owing to the fact that we're pressed for time, to use this slogan, and I would like to suggest to you that we take now a 10-minute coffee, that we use the 10-minute coffee break for some discussion in the wings. And this way will allow us to move to the next panel. The moderator will be Igor Stofiszewski. I would like to thank our guests and whose names were just mentioned. Thank you.